In December 1941, war erupted violently across the Pacific. Immediately after their surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the Empire of Japan launched a series of massive offensives against American and Allied outposts. One of those targets was Wake Island, a tiny coral atoll barely 7.5 square kilometers in size, isolated in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about 3,200 kilometers west of Hawaii. Though small and remote, Wake held immense strategic value. The United States had developed it into a forward defensive outpost with an airstrip for bombers and a vital refueling base for the Navy. By late 1941, the island's garrison consisted of about 524 personnel, 449 U.S. Marines, 69 Navy sailors, and a handful of radio operators. Their defenses were minimal: 6 5-inch coastal guns, 12 3-inch anti-aircraft guns, several dozen machine guns, and 12 Grumman F-4 F-3 Wildcat fighters stationed at the small airfield. Alongside the military presence were over 1,100 civilian construction workers from the CPNAB company racing to complete fortifications, and around 45 Chamorro laborers from Guam employed by Pan American Airways. Although they had been warned of escalating tensions with Japan, the island's fortifications were still incomplete, and crucially, Wake lacked any radar early warning system. By November 1941, all civilian women had been evacuated in anticipation of war. Surrounded by endless ocean, the remaining men, soldiers, engineers, and workers, believed they were merely guarding a distant outpost. None of them realized that within days they would be forced to stand alone against one of the most powerful naval forces in the world. On the morning of December 7, 1941, as a calm day dawned over Hawaii, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a sudden and devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, officially thrusting the United States into war. Almost simultaneously, around noon on December 8th, Wake Island time, as word of the disaster reached the tiny atoll, the roar of aircraft engines filled the sky. From bases in the Japanese-controlled Marshall Islands, 36 Mitsubishi G-3M Nell bombers swept in, unleashing a fierce bombardment on Wake. With heavy cloud cover and no radar for early warning, the Americans were caught completely off guard. On the runway, 8 of the 12 Marine F-4 F-3 Wildcat fighters were destroyed before they could take off. The remaining 4, already airborne on patrol, were unable to intercept due to poor visibility. The raid was devastating. 23 pilots were killed, 11 others wounded. Nearly 2/3 of VMF 211 wiped out. Fuel depots, barracks, and buildings were shattered, and a Pan American Airways seaplane exploded in flames, killing 9 civilian workers. Immediately afterward, the island's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Winfield S. Cunningham, ordered the evacuation of all remaining civilian airline personnel on the final outbound flight, keeping only a few native laborers to assist in defense. Anti-aircraft and machine gun positions were hastily repositioned and camouflaged. The young Marines now understood the grim truth. The war had reached them, and there was no retreat. They would have to fight to the end to defend America's lonely outpost in the Pacific. On December 9th, Japanese bombers returned, flattening the island's field hospital and destroying Pan Am's last supply depot. But this time, the defenders were ready. During the night, they had secretly relocated their 3-inch anti-aircraft guns and built wooden decoys to fool the enemy. The ruse worked perfectly. Japanese planes dropped their bombs on the dummy sites, leaving the real batteries untouched. The next day, December 10th, the bombers shifted their attack westward to Wilkes Island. Again, the deception held, but fate turned cruel. One stray bomb struck a civilian explosives depot, triggering a massive chain reaction that detonated the entire anti-aircraft ammunition reserve. The explosion shook the coral atoll, destroying part of the defenses and depriving the garrison of vital shells. For 3 consecutive days, Wake Island lay under relentless bombardment. Casualties mounted, nerves were stretched to the breaking point, yet no one faltered. The defenders knew this was only the beginning. The Japanese landing could come at any moment. Offshore, the submarine USS Triton was dispatched to intercept the approaching fleet, but on the night of December 10th, all 4 of its torpedoes missed their mark. At dawn on December 11th, 1941, the first ground battle on Wake Island began. Before sunrise, American sentries spotted the silhouettes of a Japanese fleet emerging on the horizon, a formidable task force of the Imperial Japanese Southern Fleet. It included the light cruisers Yubari, Tenryu, and Tatsuta, 6 destroyers, and 2 transport ships carrying roughly 450 naval landing troops, all supported by submarines patrolling in the outer ring. Around 6 a.m., Japanese warships opened fire, pounding the island as columns of flame and smoke engulfed the coral sands. The American gunners held their fire, waiting for the enemy to close in. When the ships were within range, they unleashed their counterattack. Within minutes, 2 5-inch shells struck the destroyer Hayate, detonating its magazine and blowing the vessel apart, the first Japanese surface warship to be sunk in World War II. Simultaneously, other batteries scored hits on the flagship Yubari, forcing it to withdraw. Overhead, the remaining 4 Marine F-4, F-3 Wildcats dove into the enemy formation. Captain Henry T. Elrod, who had already downed 2 enemy bombers in earlier dogfights, made a daring solo attack, dropping bombs directly onto the destroyer Kisaragi. The explosions ignited its depth charges, sending the ship up in a massive fireball. In less than an hour, Japan had lost 2 of its main destroyers and hundreds of sailors. Shocked by the ferocity of the resistance, the Japanese fleet retreated before landing any troops. Their first assault on American soil had ended in disaster, the Imperial Navy's first tactical defeat of the war. Over 400 Japanese soldiers were killed or wounded, a heavy blow to Tokyo's ambitions in the Pacific. News of the victory spread quickly. Only a day earlier, President Roosevelt had feared losing all U.S. outposts like Guam, Midway, and Wake. But now headlines in Honolulu read, "Brilliant victory at Wake." The nation rejoiced, and the Marine defenders were hailed as heroes. "A spark of hope has come from Wake," wrote Marine Commandant Major General Holcomb, "a precious light in this dark hour." Morale on the island soared. One report claimed that when asked if he needed reinforcements, Commander Cunningham jokingly replied, "Just send us more Japanese." Though likely exaggerated, the remark captured the garrison's defiant spirit. By that same afternoon, however, the Japanese struck back. 17 Mitsubishi G-3M Nell bombers from the Marshall Islands roared in for revenge, but this time the Americans were ready. Anti-aircraft gunners blanketed the sky with fire, downing at least 2 planes and damaging several others. One Wildcat was hit and rendered inoperable, leaving only 3 still flight-worthy. Even so, the defenders' resolve never wavered. Major Paul Putnam and his mechanics salvaged parts from wrecked aircraft to keep at least 2 Wildcats airborne. Commander Cunningham praised his gunners and pilots for their courage, calling the Wildcat aviators' survival through countless attacks a miracle, a testament to their skill and determination against overwhelming odds. In the days that followed, Wake Island entered a tense and exhausting siege. Each day, Japanese aircraft bombarded the small atoll relentlessly. On the morning of December 12th, a reconnaissance seaplane, the Kawanishi H-6K Mavis, dared to appear over the island, only to be shot down by a U.S. Wildcat fighter. That afternoon, 26 Mitsubishi G-3M Nell bombers returned for another strike, but the Wake defenders managed to shoot down 1 and damage several more. Still, the bombardments inflicted damage. A warehouse burned to the ground, and an anti-aircraft gun was knocked out. Day after day, the garrison endured constant red alerts, living under unending enemy fire, without reinforcements, resupply, or rest. News from Wake reached the United States via radio, drawing the nation's anxious attention. Yet a tragic mistake occurred. During one broadcast, an American radio station inadvertently revealed that the Wake garrison was small and unsupported. Hearing this, the men on Wake were stunned. They realized the enemy must have heard it too, effectively giving Japan a signal that they could take the island simply by overwhelming it with numbers. Meanwhile, in Hawaii, U.S. commanders were desperately trying to organize a rescue. The heroic defense of Wake had reignited national morale, pushing the Navy to act swiftly, to reinforce or evacuate the garrison before it was too late. But after the devastation of Pearl Harbor, the Pacific Fleet was crippled, lacking the ships for a long-range operation. Planners proposed a bold alternative to repurpose the seaplane tender USS Tangier, one of the few undamaged ships from Pearl Harbor, as the primary transport for a rescue mission. The plan called for the aircraft carrier Saratoga and her escorts to depart on December 16th, carrying reinforcements and supplies, aiming to reach Wake around the night of December 23rd to 24th. But events soon escaped American control. On December 20th, a PBY Catalina patrol seaplane unexpectedly landed in Wake's lagoon, carrying orders and correspondence from Hawaii. Its arrival lifted the spirits of the exhausted defenders. Many believed it signaled the start of the rescue mission. That night, under cover of darkness, the PBY quietly took aboard Major Walter Baylor, an experienced communications officer ordered to return to report the island's condition and preserve one of the few remaining radio specialists. The plane took off safely at dawn on December 21st, carrying with it the fragile hopes of those left behind. Yet that hope soon turned to misfortune. The Japanese intercepted the PBY's radio transmissions and realized that the Americans were preparing a relief operation. Acting immediately, Japanese High Command ordered their invasion timetable moved up. The second and final assault on Wake Island would begin earlier than planned, before the U.S. rescue fleet could ever arrive. This time, Japan assembled an overwhelming force, one that included warships fresh from their triumph at Pearl Harbor. Under the command of Vice Admiral Kagioka Sadamichi, the invasion fleet was reinforced by Carrier Division 2, featuring the aircraft carriers Soryu and Hiryu, along with heavy cruisers Chikuma, Tone, Ioba, Kinugasa, and numerous destroyers drawn from expeditionary forces at Guam and the Gilbert Islands. The mission was clear: to crush Wake Island once and for all. At noon on December 21st, from a safe distance offshore, Hiryu and Soryu launched 49 aircraft, a mix of bombers and A-6M0 fighters, in a massive assault. With no remaining fighters to defend them, the Wake garrison endured a relentless storm of bombs. Trenches and bunkers already damaged from earlier raids were obliterated. Casualties mounted rapidly. After the bombardment, the island commander took one final gamble, ordering the lone surviving Wildcat fighter to take off and shadow the retreating Japanese formation in hopes of locating their carriers. The pilot returned empty-handed, low on fuel and with no sight of the fleet. By late afternoon, another air raid came. 33 bombers from the Marshall Islands Roi base swooped in, killing one American sergeant and wounding several others. The next morning, December 22nd, Hiryu and Soryu launched their final full-scale strike. 39 aircraft attacked from multiple directions, saturating the island with bombs. The last two operational Wildcats of VMF 211, piloted by Captain Herbert Freuler and Lieutenant Carl Davidson, took to the skies in a desperate defense. They plunged into the enemy formation, firing wildly amid a hail of gunfire from dozens of Zeros. Outnumbered and outgunned, both planes were eventually shot down, one crashing into the sea, the other managing to limp back near the island before going down. Both pilots were captured alive, but their defiance left a deep impression even on their foes. Admiral Abe Hiroaki, commander of the Japanese carrier task force, later admitted he held great respect for the Marine pilots who fought to the bitter end over Wake. Now, the island was defenseless. With no planes left, ammunition nearly spent, anti-aircraft guns silenced, and the garrison exhausted after 2 brutal weeks of siege, the fate of Wake Island was sealed. At 2:35 a.m. on December 23, 1941, the Japanese fleet began its final assault on Wake Island. The sky was still dark when waves of naval gunfire and mortar shells rained down on the beaches, clearing the way for landing craft to approach. Elite Japanese SNLF Marines stormed ashore from multiple directions, one force striking the southern coast of Wake Island, another landing on Wilkes Island to the west. Though exhausted after 2 relentless weeks of siege, the U.S. Marines fought back fiercely. On Wilkes, Lieutenant Arthur Verneblad, or Robert Hanna according to some accounts, commanded the island's last operational 3-inch gun. He waited until the enemy was nearly ashore before ordering direct fire. The first shell hit patrol boat number 32, turning it into a fireball. The second round struck patrol boat number 33, blowing it apart near the reef and killing dozens of Japanese soldiers. But sheer numbers soon overwhelmed the defenders. The brave gun crew was cut off, and Japanese troops pushed inland toward the airfield. On the main island, about 900 Japanese soldiers attacked in waves, breaching barbed wire and minefields to penetrate the inner defenses. Fierce, chaotic fighting erupted in the darkness. One SNLF company advanced too far and stumbled into an ambush. Captain Wesley Platt led a bold counterattack, hurling grenades and unleashing machine gun fire that tore through the enemy ranks, forcing them to retreat to the beach. Yet, as dawn approached, the Japanese advantage in numbers and firepower became overwhelming. One by one, the American strong points were overrun. At the western end of the island, Captain Henry T. Elrod, the heroic Marine pilot who had earlier shot down Japanese bombers and sunk a destroyer, now fought on the ground as infantry. While shielding his comrades as they carried ammunition to a machine gun post, he was mortally wounded. Elrod fell beside the gun he defended, becoming the first U.S. Marine officer of World War II to receive the Medal of Honor posthumously for his extraordinary valor throughout the battle. By around 7 a.m., the remaining defenders had been driven back to the northeast corner of the airfield. Communication lines were cut, and many positions had lost contact. Then came the final blow. Commander Winfield Cunningham received word from Fleet Headquarters. The planned rescue mission to relieve Wake had been canceled. The reinforcements from Pearl Harbor were turning back. Help would not come. Outnumbered, out of ammunition, and with no hope of rescue, the defenders faced an agonizing decision: continue fighting to the death or surrender to spare the lives that remained. At approximately 8:30 a.m., Major James Devereaux, commander of the Marine garrison, personally raised a white flag and moved from position to position, ordering his men to cease fire. After 15 days of defiance, the Battle of Wake Island was over. The tiny coral atoll, battered, burning, and silent, had fallen. But the courage and determination of its defenders would live on forever, carved into the history of World War II. The tragic battle for Wake Island ended with devastating losses. On the American side, 52 servicemen were killed, including 49 Marines and 3 Navy personnel, and about 50 others were wounded. In addition, 70 American civilians, among them 10 native Chamorros, were killed during the bombings, and 12 more were injured. All 12 Wildcat fighters of Marine Squadron VMF-211 were destroyed or rendered inoperable. In total, about 1,616 Americans, 433 military personnel, and 1,183 civilian contractors were captured by the Japanese. Japan's victory, however, came at a heavy price. Hundreds of its soldiers were killed, around 144 in the final assault alone, with more than 300 others dead or wounded during the failed landing on December 11th, The Imperial Navy lost 4 vessels, the destroyers Hayate and Kisaragi, and 2 patrol transports, along with roughly 28 aircraft destroyed or heavily damaged. Even so, at noon on December 23, 1941, the Rising Sun flag was raised over Wake, marking the island as occupied Japanese territory for nearly 4 years. Most American prisoners were sent to prison camps across Asia, while a few were kept on Wake as forced laborers. The darkest moment came in 1943, when Japanese forces executed 98 remaining civilian prisoners on the island, fearing a U.S. counterattack, a war crime for which the Japanese commander was later executed. It wasn't until September 4, 1945, after Japan's surrender, that the remaining garrison on Wake finally laid down their arms and returned the island to the U.S. Navy. Historians regard the Battle of Wake Island as one of the most heroic defenses of the early Pacific War. Though the island fell, the defenders' unyielding courage became a symbol of American spirit. In the bleak days following Pearl Harbor, the sinking of Japanese warships and the repulsion of the first landing on December 11th reignited hope across the United States and lifted a nation's morale. The story of the Marines who held out for over 2 weeks, outnumbered and outgunned, was hailed as the Alamo of the Pacific, where bravery and sacrifice were immortalized in blood. The U.S. Congress quickly moved to honor the defenders. Captain Henry T. Elrod was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for shooting down 2 Japanese bombers, sinking the destroyer Kisaragi, and fighting to his last breath. Every man who fought in the defense of Wake received the Combat Action Ribbon with a special Wake Island device to commemorate their valor. The battle's legacy extended far beyond the military. In 1942, Hollywood released Wake Island, one of its first wartime films, dramatizing the epic defense that had inspired a nation. Strategically, the fight, though lost, inflicted Japan's first significant casualties and slowed their advance. More importantly, it proved that the enemy was not invincible and steeled America's resolve to strike back. Wake Island thus entered history as a lasting emblem of defiance, a story of men who chose to fight to the end for their country, stranded at the edge of the sea. Their courage and sacrifice helped forge a legend of patriotism and resilience that would echo through generations.